Hello, friends. Welcome to our latest episode. This time, we're going to be talking about Yellowstone National Park's most disturbing disappearances. Join me. Let's take a walk and see. Now, for millions of visitors every year, Yellowstone National Park is a place of beauty. Towering mountains, endless forests, boiling geysers, wildlife roaming freely across one of the last truly wild landscapes in America. But beneath that beauty, Yellowstone hides something darker. Because for decades now, people have entered this wilderness and simply never come back. Some of these disappearances likely have tragic explanations. Others, though, remain deeply unsettling. Now, some victims were experienced outdoorsmen who knew survival better than most people know their own hometowns. Others vanished under circumstances so bizarre that investigators still can't explain what happened. In some cases, only a single shoe, or an abandoned vehicle, or a deserted campsite is all that was ever found. In this episode, we're diving into some of the strangest and most unsettling disappearances connected to Yellowstone National Park. And the deeper you go into these cases, the more Yellowstone begins to feel less like a park and more like a place where people are swallowed whole. First up, Larry Marvin Morris. In April of 1974, 24-year-old Larry Marvin Morris was finishing temporary work as a seismograph operator in Riverton, Wyoming. Originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Larry planned to drive home after making a short stop at Yellowstone National Park, but he never made it back home. Larry was last seen on April 26, 1974, leaving Riverton in a green 1966 Ford pickup truck. Friends and co-workers expected him back in Oklahoma within days, but when he failed to report to work the following Monday, concern quickly turned into panic. Investigators searched Larry's apartment and discovered something unsettling. There were no signs that he had ever returned home. No evidence of packing, no signs of a struggle, no clues at all. But then the case took a terrifying turn. Less than 2 weeks later, police in Idaho arrested two men attempting to rob a country store. One of them identified himself as Larry Morris, but he wasn't Larry Morris. The suspects were later identified as James Franklin Jathers and Jack Raymond Lincoln, both convicted criminals with violent histories. Lincoln had actually escaped a Colorado prison just 2 days before Larry vanished. And when investigators searched the men's vehicles, they found Larry's credit cards and identification. Authorities soon uncovered a trail stretching across multiple states. Witnesses reported the two men using Larry's credit cards in Wyoming, Nevada, California, and Idaho while signing receipts with Larry's name. But then it gets even worse. Larry's truck was eventually discovered abandoned at a repair shop in California. Lincoln's fingerprints were reportedly found inside the vehicle and on the stolen credit card receipts. Yet, despite all that, no one was ever charged with Larry Morris's murder. Former Detective Ed McLaughlin, who spent decades working the case, became convinced Larry had encountered the two men shortly after leaving Riverton, possibly picking them up while they hitchhiked along the highway. At that time, that kind of thing was common, especially in rural Wyoming during the 1970s. Now, McLaughlin believed Larry was likely murdered somewhere between Riverton and Dubois, Wyoming. Heavy snowstorms had blanketed the region, meaning the killers probably wouldn't have needed to move far off the highway to hide a body forever. And forever may be exactly what happened, because more than 50 years later, Larry Morris has never been found. Next up, case of Daniel Lynn Campbell. Now, all disappearances feel tragic, but others just feel wrong. Daniel Lynn Campbell's case falls firmly into the second category. Dan was an experienced outdoorsman from Big Timber, Montana. He knew the Yellowstone wilderness well and often spent days hiking through remote backcountry terrain with his dog Freckles. Then, on April 6, 1991, Dan was dropped off near the Hell-Roaring Creek trailhead inside Yellowstone National Park. His plan had seemed straightforward. He intended to hike north toward Jardine, Montana, while recovering a cache of hidden elk antlers he had illegally collected earlier. The antlers, they could be sold for thousands of dollars, and Dan reportedly needed money badly. But Dan never arrived at his pickup point, and neither did Freckles. Search teams launched an operation days later, but Yellowstone was suddenly hit by severe late-season snowstorms. Avalanche conditions developed across parts of the park, making searches incredibly dangerous. Still, something about the case immediately stood out. Searchers found absolutely no trace of Dan or his dog. No backpack, no clothing, not a single footprint. Nothing. Eventually, after the snow melted, investigators located Dan's abandoned campsite near Specimen Creek on the slopes of Hell Roaring Mountain. The camp looked eerily untouched. Food remained scattered around the site. Supplies were still there. The fire pit contained burned cans and evidence that Dan had cooked a meal before vanishing. It looked as though he'd simply walked away from the camp and disappeared into thin air. But there were troubling rumors surrounding Dan's disappearance almost immediately. Family members learned that multiple antler hunters had been operating in the same area around the time Dan vanished. Some witnesses reportedly heard gunshots echoing through the mountains. Others claimed Dan had been associating with dangerous individuals connected to the illegal antler trade, a black market industry so lucrative that park officials once compared it to drug trafficking. Dan's brothers became convinced that he had been murdered, and over time, they grew furious with law enforcement. According to his family, investigators ignored possible suspects, released armed antler hunters without properly questioning them, and repeatedly pushed the theory that Dan had voluntarily disappeared despite evidence suggesting otherwise. At one point, the family even sued the sheriff's department, alleging incompetence and claiming critical evidence had been lost or mishandled. Then came another disturbing detail. In documents later obtained through a FOIA, Freedom of Information request, investigators revealed that new evidence surfaced in 2016, evidence serious enough to reignite investigative activity. But the details were almost entirely redacted. To this day, nobody knows exactly what investigators discovered. And perhaps the strangest part of all, not even Freckles ever came back out of Yellowstone. Now, many believe Dan and his dog may have been murdered somewhere near Hell Roaring Mountain. But more than 3 decades later, nobody truly knows what happened out there. Next up, Kim Crumbo. By 2021, Kim Crumbo was practically considered a legend in the outdoor world. A former Navy SEAL who served 2 tours in Vietnam, Kim later worked as a river ranger and wilderness coordinator at Grand Canyon National Park. Friends described him as obsessively prepared, highly skilled, and one of the most experienced outdoorsmen they'd ever known, which makes what happened next so difficult to explain. In September of 2021, Kim and his half-brother Mark O'Neill entered Yellowstone for a 4-night canoe trip near Shoshone Lake, one of the largest remote backcountry lakes in the United States. But when the pair failed to return, family members reported them missing. Search teams soon located their abandoned campsite. Then they found their canoe, a paddle, a life vest, and eventually Mark O'Neill's body along the shoreline after what investigators believe was a cold water accident. But Kim Crumbo was nowhere to be found, and that shocked everyone who knew him. Friends insist Kim was the kind of person who planned for every possible contingency. Some openly stated that they believed if anyone could survive Yellowstone alone, it would be Kim Crumbo. But the conditions on Shoshone Lake are brutal. Water temperatures hover around 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Strong winds and sudden storms can turn the lake deadly within minutes. Survival time after immersion is often estimated at less than 30 minutes. Still, no body was ever recovered. Despite massive searches involving helicopters, shoreline crews, and water operations, Kim Crumbo vanished completely. And, considering his level of experience, many people continue to struggle with the official explanation. Next up, we have the strange case of Ilhun Row. Now, most Yellowstone disappearances involve forests, rivers, cliffs, or storms. But Ilhun Row's case involves something far, far worse. A thermal pool. In August of 2022, Yellowstone employees made a horrifying discovery at Abyss Pool, one of the park's deepest and hottest geothermal springs. Floating in the water was a shoe. But the strange thing, the shoe contained a human foot. DNA later identified the remains as belonging to 70-year-old Ilhun Row, a California resident visiting Yellowstone alone. Investigators soon learned that Rowe had likely vanished weeks earlier. His abandoned vehicle remained parked near the West Thumb Geyser Basin. Inside were maps, personal belongings, notebooks, poems, cash, and travel materials. But no sign of Rowe himself. Authorities eventually concluded that he likely fell into the thermal spring sometime around July 31st. And what happened afterward is almost too horrifying to imagine. Abyss Pool reaches temperatures above 140 degrees Fahrenheit and extends more than 50 feet deep. Investigators believe the extreme heat and acidic conditions severely destroyed much of the remains. But no witnesses ever came forward. No note was ever discovered. No evidence of foul play was found. Just a single shoe that still contained part of a human foot. It's one of the most disturbing mysteries Yellowstone has ever seen. And then there's Stuart Isaac. In September of 2010, 48-year-old Stuart Isaac abruptly left his home in Maryland after writing a note telling family members he was going on a cross-country trip. Days later, he arrived at Yellowstone National Park. Then, he simply disappeared. Now, what makes Stuart's case so strange is that he wasn't known for hiking or wilderness survival. Friends described him as someone with very little outdoor experience. Yet, investigators later found his abandoned Lexus parked near Craig Pass, a remote stretch of road between Old Faithful and West Thumb. The car was unlocked, the keys were still inside, and there were no hiking trails nearby. But even stranger, just 2 days earlier, Stuart had made an unexpected late-night phone call to an old high school friend in Guam. The conversation reportedly lasted 2 hours. No one knows what they discussed. When park rangers discovered the vehicle on September 26th, extensive land and air searches began immediately. But nothing was found. No footprints, no supplies, no evidence Stuart had even walked into the wilderness. And that leaves investigators with a haunting question. Why would a man with little wilderness experience suddenly drive across the country alone, abandon his vehicle in a remote part of Yellowstone, and vanish forever? So, Yellowstone National Park covers more than 2 million acres of mountains, forests, rivers, canyons, caves, geothermal fields, and isolated wilderness. It's beautiful, but it's also unforgiving. Every year, people underestimate the park's dangers. Freezing water, hidden thermal pools, wildlife, cliffs, storms, and terrain so vast that someone can disappear only a few hundred feet off the trail and never be seen again. But, again, some of these cases feel different. A vanished outdoorsman and his dog, a suspected murder hidden beneath snow-covered mountains, an abandoned car with the keys still inside, a legendary survival expert who disappeared without a trace, and a human foot floating in a boiling spring. Somewhere out there, Yellowstone is still keeping secrets, and for the families left behind, those secrets never stop hurting. Well, friends, there you have it. What do you think of these cases from Yellowstone National Park? As always, I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. In the meantime, be good to yourselves and each other. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll see you a little further on down the trail. Thanks for listening, and please tell your animals Steve says hi.